How's it going, everybody? This is the Stimulus Check Hub here, and today we have a lot of positive news to go over. We have some interesting news about our stimulus checks, some interesting news about Joe Biden, and some recent calls by officials that they want 2 more direct payments going to U.S. citizens, which obviously I completely agree with. So first, let's go over what some politicians are calling for, which is basically 2 more stimulus checks in the form of direct payments. These politicians are making similar arguments about inflation. They're noticing costs are going up. They're noticing that people on fixed incomes are really struggling right now. And this is what happens when you have an economy that is managed improperly, and it's managed in a way where its only goal is to extract resources from the people at the bottom and push it up to the top. Eventually, that system comes to an inevitable conclusion. It comes to an end when it fails, and that's what I don't think our politicians want to understand. They don't want to understand that if you build a building and your foundation is shaky, then the entire thing's going to come falling down. So that's what we're seeing in the economy today. Now, Joe Biden has said, basically in relation to the stimulus checks, that if Congress is to do something, then he'll ultimately act on it. Now, I think you can criticize him for that in a sense that he is at least open to the idea, but you can also criticize him in the sense that there's really nothing he can do on an individual level. If you'll remember when Donald Trump was in office, he can't single-handedly pass stimulus checks. It's just not within his authority. It's outside of the Constitution. It's outside of the rule of law. So it's not really possible for Biden to individually start sending out checks. It's just not legal. But I do feel like Joe Biden could be calling for checks in a much more direct manner, similar to how Trump did, if he really wanted to get them done. So it definitely seems like there is a conflict of interest there in terms of what's being said versus what's actually being done. And this is what happens when your broader society becomes, I would argue, satanic in a way, where we're totally away from any sort of morality or God or any sort of real guiding light for our people. Our people don't have a guiding light anymore. We don't have morals or values anymore that tie us to our fellow man. We don't have that anymore. We don't have that religious undertone of wanting to help people because it's the right thing to do. It's now all a transaction. It's all about money. It's all short-sighted. And this system, it's going to end. I don't know when it's going to ultimately fail and collapse in on itself, but it's going to happen because this is what happens when you inevitably reach the conclusion where so much wealth and power has been concentrated at the top that now we're on shaky ground at the bottom. Now the people at the bottom are really struggling. Now the people on fixed income are really struggling. And I think it's good that Biden is stepping up and saying he's open for another stimulus check. And I think it's good that he's saying he wants to do more infrastructure spending, and I agree on all that. Where I disagree is I want a president who's going to be a little more direct about it. I want a president who's going to say what he wants and what he wants Congress to do specifically, not just this typical political talk of, oh, we're thinking about doing something, or, oh, if it hits my desk, I'll do something. I don't like that kind of talk. I like politicians who are kind of straight to the point. I didn't love Trump. I didn't love everything he did. But one thing I did like about him is that you never guessed what Trump was thinking. You knew immediately, yeah, I want more stimulus. Yeah, I want bigger checks. Like, you knew immediately what Trump wanted. And I think we could use a little bit more of that kind of tone in government. Now, obviously, I think Joe Biden has done a decent job in terms of his proposals recently. I do like the infrastructure bill. I think the approval rating among Republicans for the infrastructure bill was like 68% or 70%. That's pretty high. I mean, that shows that even Republicans understand our sidewalks are outdated, our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our lighting, our charging stations for electric cars, our electrical grid, everything is kind of outdated, and I think even Republicans recognize that. So I think that was a smart bill to start with. In terms of the stimulus, it's very clear that Biden is willing to, but I think I don't think Congress would be willing to. Because I think a lot of states, they don't want to keep seeing this level of wage inflation, which just goes to show how, evil the system is. But they want asset prices to get a little bit cooled down because asset prices have gone up so much recently. They want things to slow down, and I think a good way to do that is to basically contract the labor pool, slow down the amount of money and the amount of resources going into salaries, because that's ultimately causing people to dump more of their salaries in the stock market. They feel like, oh, I can afford that higher house, I can afford that extra payment, and that's how you get in like a 2008 type situation where people have like 6 houses and people are buying, more useless crap they don't need. And we don't want to enter that kind of situation. Although the banks and corporations are being extremely greedy right now, that's the general status quo. That's not anything out of the ordinary. But what is out of the ordinary is this huge inflation we've been seeing. We've seen prices go up dramatically in terms of food. If any of you have been doing work on your houses lately, I'm sure you've noticed lumber prices are higher. Anything to do with construction is generally very elevated right now. It's not quite as bad as it was at the peak, but it's still well above where it was a year and a half ago. Well above where it was a year and a half ago. You're seeing gas prices go up. It's now, in my area, you're looking at about $3.30 on the pump. That's a lot. I mean, it was almost sub 2 about a year and a half ago. So you're talking about going from like $1.98 or $2.10 to $3.30. That's a big deal to a lot of people. If you're somebody on a fixed income, that's a big deal. So I'm sure Biden is going to be facing immense pressure from the people on fixed incomes, and there's really not going to be a lot he can do other than passing more stimulus, which is why you have a lot of representatives calling for more stimulus. You have some representatives who are making the leap to go to straight UBI, which would basically be monthly stimulus checks. I could understand the argument that that's a bit aggressive, but I also think it's going to happen regardless with automation and various other factors. So it's an interesting time to be living through. I mean, we're really seeing how the economy is going to shape up in the future, where we're headed as a country. Are we going to go down more the route where the government controls everything? Are we going to have some sort of mixed system? Are we going to have a Federal Reserve takeover of all the assets, which is kind of where it's headed right now, depending on how you look at it? It just seems like we're not going towards a super duper positive direction. But I'm also not saying all hope is lost. I mean, we don't really know where this is going to end up. We're in totally uncharted waters here, so it really just depends on how it plays out. I'm excited to see how the politicians play it going forward with the stimulus checks. I think the stimulus checks, there's a good chance that over time the calls for more stimulus checks will overwhelm the politicians, and maybe they'll have to capitulate and do what needs to be done.